Most traders don't quit trading. They quit progressing. That's the part nobody talks about. There's no dramatic exit, no final blown account, no goodbye post. People just stay where they are. Same results, same frustration, same conversations. Years pass, and they're still trading like beginners. If that thought makes you uncomfortable, pause. That discomfort isn't judgment, it's recognition. Most traders who are stuck aren't lazy. They aren't unintelligent. They aren't unwilling to work. Many of them have done exactly what they were told to do. They studied, they practiced, they put in time, and yet nothing fundamentally shifted. That's because time in the market does not equal progression. Repetition without evolution creates stagnation. The beginner phase isn't defined by how long you've been trading. It's defined by how you make decisions. Beginners react to price. Beginners react to emotion. Beginners react to outcomes. They don't realize they're reacting because reaction feels like engagement. Engagement feels productive. But productivity and progress are not the same thing. One of the biggest reasons traders stay beginners is because the beginner phase feels deceptively safe. There's always something new to learn. Always another explanation. Always another reason results haven't shown up yet. Learning becomes a shield, a way to avoid confronting behavior. Because behavior is harder to change than knowledge. Knowledge makes you feel capable. Behavior forces you to be honest. Most traders unconsciously choose knowledge. I remember when I finally realized this in my own trading. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't lost. I knew what setups I liked. I understood structure. I could explain why trades worked or didn't. But my results were still inconsistent. And that's when it became obvious that the problem wasn't what I knew. It was how I behaved after I knew. I would hesitate. I would override rules. I would interfere with good trades. Not because I lacked information, but because I lacked regulation. That's the real beginner trap. Most traders think beginners struggle because they don't know enough. In reality, beginners struggle because they don't control themselves consistently. If your execution changes based on your last trade, you're still in the beginner phase. If your confidence rises and falls daily, you're still in the beginner phase. If you need constant reassurance that you're doing the right thing, you're still in the beginner phase. That's not an insult. It's a diagnostic. Another reason traders stay stuck is because they confuse activity with intentionality. They trade often, they analyze constantly, that they stay busy, but their actions aren't anchored to a clear operating framework. They don't know exactly why they're entering most trades. They don't know precisely what invalidates their edge. They don't know when they're done for the day unless frustration decides for them. Those are beginner traits, regardless of how long someone's been trading. Charts can look advanced while thinking stays primitive. Most traders never hear this because it doesn't sell well. It's easier to sell new strategies than to sell self-regulation. It's easier to promise edge than to demand discipline. So people stay beginners, just better informed ones. Another major reason traders never level up is because they don't narrow focus long enough to build depth. They switch strategies, they switch styles, they switch time frames. Every switch resets the learning curve. They feel like they're accumulating experience, but they're actually restarting over and over. Depth requires commitment. Commitment removes excuses. Once you commit, results point back at you. Most traders avoid that moment for years. If you've been telling yourself you're still finding what fits, pause there. At some point, exploration becomes avoidance. That line is uncomfortable, but crossing it is necessary. The beginner phase also persists because traders don't separate trading skill from self-regulation skill. They assume better analysis will automatically produce better execution. It won't. You can understand markets deeply and still sabotage trades through impatience, hesitation, or emotional overreaction. That's why so many traders say, "My analysis is good, I just mess it up." That sentence tells you everything. Analysis isn't the bottleneck, behavior is. If this is already reframing how you think about progression, subscribe. Because this channel focuses on the internal upgrades that actually move traders forward, not surface-level tactics. Another mistake beginners make is reviewing performance emotionally instead of structurally. They ask, did I win? Did I lose? Should I have done something different? Those questions keep the focus on outcome. More advanced traders ask, was this trade necessary? Did I follow my process? Did emotion influence this decision? That shift is where growth begins. If your reviews are still outcome-focused, you're reinforcing beginner thinking every single day. Progress doesn't happen when you learn more. It happens when you stop needing the market to validate you. That's the threshold most traders never cross. And until you do, the beginner phase doesn't end, no matter how many years pass. One of the biggest myths in trading is that time alone creates competence. People assume that if they stay around long enough, something will eventually click. That experience will naturally sharpen judgment. That mistakes will fade simply because they've been made before. That's not how skill develops. Time only magnifies whatever habits you already have. If your habits are reactive, time makes you more reactive. If your habits are emotional, time makes those emotions more familiar. If your habits are inconsistent, time just makes inconsistency harder to notice. That's why you can meet traders who've been active for 5 or 10 years and still sound exactly like beginners. Same complaints, same confusion, same emotional swings. The beginner phase isn't something you outgrow, it's something you exit intentionally. Most traders never do. Another reason traders stay stuck is because they don't change what they pay attention to. Beginners watch price obsessively, they stare at candles, they react to movement. They feel tension when things move fast and boredom when they don't. Price becomes the center of their emotional world. More experienced traders shift attention away from price and toward behavior. They watch how often they break rules. When impatience shows up, what triggers overconfidence? What causes hesitation? That shift doesn't happen automatically, it has to be chosen. If your attention is still locked on the chart instead of on yourself, you're still operating at a beginner level, no matter how good your analysis looks. Another trap that keeps traders stuck is the belief that struggle means progress. Struggling feels like effort. Effort feels productive. So when trading feels hard, people assume they're doing the work. But difficulty alone doesn't equal advancement. You can struggle for years doing the wrong kind of work. Beginners struggle with uncertainty. Professionals struggle with restraint. Those are not the same problems. If your main challenge is figuring out what's happening, you're still early. If your challenge is stopping yourself from interfering with what you already understand, you're closer to leveling up. Most traders never make that transition because struggle feels familiar. Familiar feels safe. Another reason the beginner phase persists is because traders don't develop standards. They develop hopes. They hope a trade works. They hope today is different. They hope this setup is the one. Hope replaces criteria. Beginners often can't clearly explain why they took a trade beyond "it looked good" or "it made sense at the time." That vagueness allows emotional decision-making to hide behind logic. More advanced traders don't rely on hope. They rely on standards. Standards for when to trade. Standards for when not to trade. Standards for when to stop. Without standards, everything becomes negotiable, and negotiation is where beginners live. Another pattern that keeps traders stuck is outcome-driven motivation. They only feel motivated when they're winning. They lose confidence when they're not. Their emotional state mirrors their equity curve. That dependency prevents growth. Professionals separate motivation from outcome. They measure success by execution quality, not by profit in isolation. That allows them to stay consistent through flat or losing periods. If your motivation disappears during drawdowns, you're still psychologically attached to outcome. That attachment is a beginner trait. Another overlooked reason traders stay stuck is because they never slow down enough to observe themselves. They're always adjusting strategies, tweaking rules, adding filters, anything to avoid sitting still and noticing patterns in their own behavior. Observation is uncomfortable because it reveals repetition. Repeated mistakes, repeated emotional reactions, repeated avoidance. Most traders don't want to see that, so they stay busy. If you've been constantly tweaking instead of stabilizing, pause there. Tweaking often feels like progress, but it can also be avoidance disguised as optimization. The beginner phase is noisy. There's a lot happening, but very little is settling. Advanced traders operate quietly. They do fewer things. They make fewer decisions. They create fewer emotional spikes. That quietness is not lack of ambition. It's focus. If this is starting to feel uncomfortably accurate, subscribe, because this channel exists to help traders move past the phase where effort is high, but results don't change. Another difference between beginners and professionals is how they treat mistakes. Beginners personalize mistakes. They attach emotion to them. They try to make up for them. Professionals contextualize mistakes. They review them, they extract information, they move on. There's no urgency to fix anything immediately. Urgency is a beginner signal. It usually means emotion is driving behavior. Time doesn't remove urgency. Structure does. That's why years alone don't move traders forward. Until structure replaces reaction, the beginner phase doesn't end. It just becomes more frustrating. One of the hardest parts about escaping the beginner phase is that most traders don't actually understand why they're stuck. They feel it, they sense it, they get frustrated by it, but they misdiagnose the cause. They assume the problem is missing knowledge, missing confidence, missing discipline, missing the right setup. In reality, the problem is much quieter. They never changed how they relate to uncertainty. On a previous video, one comment stood out. Someone said, "I know what I'm supposed to do, but when real money is on the line, I can't stick to it." That comment explains the beginner phase better than any chart ever could. Because beginners don't struggle with understanding. They struggle with self-regulation under uncertainty. Knowing what to do in theory and doing it consistently when outcomes are unknown are two completely different skills. Most traders assume the first automatically leads to the second. It doesn't. That gap is where most people stay stuck for years. They keep adding information to a system that doesn't have emotional containment. So when pressure shows up, behavior collapses. If you've ever felt calm while backtesting but reactive while trading live, like the video, because that difference has nothing to do with your strategy and everything to do with how you handle uncertainty. Beginners treat uncertainty as a threat. They want clarity now. They want confirmation now. They want to know if they're right now. That urgency drives impulsive behavior. More advanced traders accept uncertainty as part of the environment. They don't rush to eliminate it. They build systems that function with it. That's the shift most traders never make. Another misdiagnosis is believing that confidence comes before consistency. Beginners wait to feel confident before executing cleanly. They hesitate. They second guess. They look for reassurance. Professionals execute first. Confidence follows later. Confidence isn't a prerequisite, it's a byproduct. If you're waiting to feel ready before committing to behavior, you'll stay stuck indefinitely. The beginner phase is full of conditional behavior. I'll be disciplined once I'm more confident. I'll size properly once I'm more consistent. I'll trust my setup once it proves itself. That logic never resolves. Consistency comes from doing the right thing before you feel comfortable. That's uncomfortable, which is why most traders avoid it. Another reason traders misdiagnose their stagnation is because they think emotions are the enemy. They try to eliminate fear. They try to eliminate doubt. They try to eliminate hesitation. That's not realistic. Professionals don't eliminate emotion. They design around it. They assume emotion will show up and build rules that still hold when it does. Beginners assume emotion is a temporary problem that will disappear with experience, so they never account for it structurally. If your trading plan only works when you feel calm, it's not a plan, it's a hope. Another misdiagnosis is thinking that more exposure equals more learning. More trades, more screen time, more markets. But exposure without reflection doesn't create growth. It just creates familiarity. You can become familiar with losing. That familiarity is dangerous because it feels like progress. The beginner phase often persists because traders normalize chaos. They get used to inconsistency. They stop expecting stability. At some point, inconsistency becomes their baseline. They don't realize they're stuck because stuck feels normal. If trading still feels mentally noisy, reactive, and emotionally charged after years, pause there. That's not a market problem. That's a structural one. Another misdiagnosis is believing that being busy means being serious. Beginners stay busy. They tweak constantly. They consume endlessly. Professionals simplify. They reduce variables. They narrow focus. They repeat intentionally. That contrast is uncomfortable because simplicity feels exposed. With fewer variables, mistakes are obvious. Most traders would rather be busy than exposed. If you've been telling yourself you just need one more adjustment, subscribe. Because this channel focuses on the changes that feel uncomfortable but actually move the needle. Another critical difference between beginners and professionals is how they interpret frustration. Beginners see frustration as a sign they're doing something wrong. Professionals see frustration as feedback. Frustration often signals misalignment between expectations and reality. Beginners try to remove frustration by changing strategies. Professionals remove frustration by adjusting expectations or behavior. That distinction determines who progresses. Another reason traders stay stuck is because they don't give themselves clear transitions. They never formally exit the beginner phase. They don't redefine standards, they don't redefine risk, they don't redefine success. So they keep operating with beginner rules forever. Professionals draw lines. They decide, This behavior is no longer acceptable. This execution standard is non-negotiable. This is how I measure myself now. Without those lines, nothing changes. If this is starting to feel personal, that's a good sign. It means you're not just consuming information, you're recognizing patterns. And recognition is the first real exit from the beginner phase. Most traders think the beginner phase ends when results improve. That's backwards. Results improve after the beginner phase ends. The beginner phase actually ends when behavior stabilizes. Not when you feel confident, not when you feel ready, when your actions stop changing based on emotion. That's the threshold most traders never cross. One of the clearest behaviors that keeps traders stuck is negotiation. Beginners negotiate with themselves constantly. Just this once. I'll tighten the stop later. I'll size up next time. This one feels different. Every negotiation erodes structure. Professionals don't negotiate. Rules are rules, limits are limits, stops are stops. That rigidity isn't stubbornness, it's protection. If you find yourself bending rules depending on mood or recent results, you're still operating in the beginner phase, regardless of experience. Another trap is emotional time travel. Beginners live in the past or the future. They replay losses, they anticipate regret, they imagine outcomes before they happen. That pulls attention away from the present decision. Professionals operate in the present. They don't relive the last trade while placing the next one. They don't project future profits while managing risk. They stay where action is actually required. If your mind is rarely where your body is while trading, pause there. That split creates impulsive behavior. Another behavior that traps traders is over-identification with outcomes. Beginners feel like a winning trade proves something about them. A losing trade threatens something about them. That emotional attachment makes every decision heavier than it needs to be. Professionals detach identity from outcome. They don't see trades as reflections of self-worth. They see them as executions within a probabilistic system. That detachment creates calm. Calm improves decision quality. If your confidence depends on your last trade, you're still playing the beginner game. Another pattern that keeps traders stuck is overexposure. Too many markets, too many strategies, too many opinions. Beginners believe exposure creates understanding. In reality, it creates confusion. Professionals reduce exposure intentionally. They limit what they trade, they limit what they watch, they limit who they listen to. That reduction increases clarity. If you're constantly consuming new ideas while results stay flat, that's not growth. That's noise. Another critical behavior is reactionary sizing. Beginners size up after wins. They size down after losses. They let emotion influence risk. Professionals fix risk independent of emotion. Risk doesn't change based on mood. Position size doesn't change based on confidence. Consistency requires fixed parameters. If your risk fluctuates based on how you feel, you're still learning discipline, not applying it. Another subtle trap is chasing closure. Beginners want closure quickly. They want to know if they were right. They want the trade to resolve. They want emotional relief. That need for closure causes premature exits and forced entries. Professionals tolerate open loops. They allow trades to develop. They allow uncertainty to exist. They don't rush resolution. That tolerance is learned. If waiting feels unbearable, that's not impatience, that's a lack of containment. Another behavior that traps traders is post hoc rationalization. After a trade fails, beginners rewrite the story. I knew I should have waited. I almost didn't take it. The market manipulated it. That rewriting protects ego but blocks learning. Professionals document honestly. They record what they saw. They record what they felt. They record what they did. No narrative smoothing, and that honesty accelerates growth. Another key difference is how traders define a good day. Beginners define a good day as a profitable one. Professionals define a good day as a disciplined one. That definition determines behavior. If profit defines success, discipline becomes optional. If discipline defines success, profit becomes inevitable. That shift marks the exit from the beginner phase. If this section is uncomfortable, subscribe, because this channel exists to challenge the habits that keep traders stuck even when knowledge isn't the issue. Another behavior worth calling out is avoidance of stillness. Beginners struggle to sit without action. They need stimulation. They need movement. Professionals are comfortable doing nothing. They don't confuse inactivity with inefficiency. That comfort with stillness is rare and powerful. Finally, one of the most important shifts that frees traders is delayed gratification. Beginners want fast feedback. Professionals optimize for long-term expectancy. That difference determines who compounds. The beginner phase ends when you stop needing immediate validation and start prioritizing correct behavior over time. Not once, not occasionally, consistently. That's the line. And most traders never cross it. At some point, every trader who makes real progress realizes something uncomfortable. The beginner phase didn't end because they learned more. It ended because they stopped allowing certain behaviors. That's the part most people miss. Leaving the beginner phase isn't about adding sophistication, it's about removing instability. You don't graduate because your strategy gets smarter. You graduate because your behavior gets quieter. Most traders never make that transition because it doesn't feel like growth. It feels like restriction. Fewer trades, fewer decisions, fewer emotional spikes. To a beginner, that feels like regression. To a professional, it's freedom. The truth is, most traders don't fail to escape the beginner phase because they lack talent. They fail because they never close the door on beginner behavior. They keep allowing rule bending, emotional sizing, outcome-based confidence, constant tweaking, reactive decision-making. As long as those behaviors are tolerated, the beginner phase stays alive. Progress only begins when those behaviors become unacceptable and not, I'll try to fix this, not, I'm working on this. Unacceptable. That's the shift. Professional traders don't rely on motivation to behave correctly. They rely on standards. Standards remove negotiation. Negotiation is where beginners live. If you're still negotiating with yourself daily, you're still in the beginner phase, regardless of how long you've been trading. Another realization that marks the exit from beginner thinking is understanding that consistency precedes confidence. Beginners wait to feel confident before acting consistently. Professionals act consistently even when confidence is low. Confidence follows behavior, not the other way around. That's why so many traders stay stuck. They're waiting for a feeling that only arrives after they do the thing they're avoiding. The same applies to discipline. Discipline isn't something you summon. It's something you design for. Professionals don't trust themselves to behave under pressure. They build systems that reduce pressure. They trade fewer setups. They define clearer rules. They set hard limits. They assume emotion will show up and plan accordingly. Beginners assume emotion will disappear with experience. It won't. Another defining moment in leaving the beginner phase is when traders stop needing the market to validate them. Beginners need reassurance. They need wins to feel capable. They need confirmation to feel safe. Professionals don't. They already decided who they are before the trade. That internal certainty stabilizes everything. If your emotional state still mirrors your P&L, you're not broken. You're just still early in the psychological progression. And that's okay. What matters is whether you recognize it. If you've made it this far into the video and parts of it felt uncomfortable like the video, because that discomfort usually shows up right before real growth begins. Leaving the beginner phase also requires redefining what progress looks like. Progress is not more trades, more markets, more indicators, more information. Progress is fewer mistakes, fewer emotional reactions, fewer impulsive decisions, fewer "why did I do that" moments. That kind of progress is quiet. It doesn't look impressive, it doesn't give dopamine hits, but it compounds. Another major shift is accepting that boredom is not the enemy. For beginners, boredom feels like stagnation. For professionals, boredom is stability. When trading feels boring, it usually means you're no longer feeding emotional impulses. You're just executing. That's when consistency starts forming. Most traders quit right before this phase because boredom feels like something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. The noise is just gone. One of the most important realizations that marks the end of the beginner phase is this. You don't need to feel in control to trade well. You need to be contained. Contained by rules, contained by limits, contained by structure. Control is fragile. Containment is durable. Beginners chase control. Professionals build containment. That's why professionals survive volatility without spiraling. Beginners panic and change things. Professionals slow down and observe. Beginners search for fixes. Professionals look for deviations in behavior. That difference determines longevity. If your first instinct during drawdowns is to overhaul your system, you're still reacting emotionally. That reaction keeps you trapped. The exit from the beginner phase happens when drawdowns trigger analysis, not urgency. Another defining trait of traders who escape the beginner phase is patience with identity. They don't rush to label themselves as good or bad traders. They let results unfold over time. They don't anchor self-worth to short-term performance. That emotional patience is rare, and it's essential. If you've ever felt pressure to prove yourself to the market, subscribe, because this channel is about removing that pressure so execution can stabilize. Leaving the beginner phase also requires narrowing focus. Most traders think expanding knowledge is the path forward. In reality, depth beats breadth. One setup, one style, one process. Mastered deeply. Every time you widen before mastering, you reset your progress. Professionals don't rush expansion, they earn it. Another realization that changes everything is understanding that trading isn't a test of intelligence. It's a test of restraint. The smartest traders fail when they can't regulate themselves. Average traders succeed when they build systems that prevent self-sabotage. That's humbling, and it's liberating, because it means success is less about brilliance and more about consistency. If you've been hard on yourself for not figuring it out yet, pause there. Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they never stop doing the things that keep them beginners. The beginner phase ends when rules stop being optional, outcomes stop controlling emotions, patience stops feeling like punishment. Structure replaces willpower. That's the transition, and it's available to anyone willing to make it. If you know someone who's been trading for years but still feels stuck, share this video because many traders don't realize they're trapped in a phase they were never meant to stay in. I'll leave you with this. The beginner phase doesn't end when you know enough. It ends when you stop behaving like a beginner. And once that happens, progress stops being a mystery. It becomes inevitable.